Really, I thought in the spirit of Millie, we should start just by going around and everybody, because this is what Millie would do to embarrass everybody. Everybody should introduce themselves and say how they know Millie or Sharon or myself.
You all know me. I'm Marcia.
And always best friend.
Yes, and best friend.
I'm Joni Harris. I've known Millie since I was 7 in her art classes and stayed in love with her ever since.
I'm Roger Lounsbury. I met Millie about 14 years ago when I started dating her granddaughter.
I'm Sarah.
In the garage studio with Millie, and has been an inspiration in my whole life, so I'm happy to be here.
Nine.
Millie quickly became my second mother and then a dear friend, and we remain so for life.
The same street.
Same street, so we were both close friends and close neighbors. We spent hours.
The middle 50s when the Adlers moved to Briarcliff. My parents, Milton and Lenore units, lived in Scarborough. And so when I got to be a young adult, I also got to be friends with Millie and Jack and spend time on my own with them.
I'm Sean Dustin Halliday. I first met Millie about 7 years ago when I started going out with her other granddaughter.
Friend of Sharon's, and I feel as though I know a great deal about Millie and Jack and the whole family. As Sharon and I have sung together and walked together and yoga together, and I'm very happy to be here. It's fascinating to see all of Millie and her work and her family.
Javiera, our angel. Hi. You want me to talk for you?
I'm Javiera. I love everyone who used to
Javiera really accompanied my mom in her last 6 years and made her able to stay in her home, in her country, as she would call it. And these are her friends from the church. Mary?
I'm Mary Ting, and I met Meryl about 30 years ago when I was looking for a place for my 3 children to get their hands dirty. I was looking for a ceramics studio. She said, I don't do ceramics, but let's look at printmaking. And my children never complained about going. They didn't want piano lessons, they didn't want flute lessons or clarinet lessons, but they always went to art classes. And she's remained a mentor and art teacher to them for life.
I'm Max, and I'm one of those kids that spent grade school and high school at Millie's. And she's very special to me and to our whole family. And this is my wife, Lauren.
And I'm Sean. Started about the same time as Max in '88, and carried on through high school and spent some Saturdays helping with her younger students, and always came back to visit breaks. And here.
I'm Orlin, my husband Robert, and we're at Sean Dustin Halliday's terrace. And we never met Millie in person, but we were introduced to the abundance of our really lovely, wonderful, and varied artwork on their walls.
Millie's grandson was my partner's husband, and our kids, Zoe and what's your name? And mine. So Millie's great grandkids.
I'm Karen. I work with Sharon at Public Theater Knowles, and I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm also so grateful that I can tell other people after today to come and see this work, that it'll be displayed for a while. So, you know, it's so unbelievable. It's worth more time.
I'm Mark Sarrazin. I'm the president of the Ossining Arts Council. This is our home. I didn't know Millie, but I met Sharon a few months ago, and we talked about doing the show. So thank you for coming, and I think this is a fantastic opportunity to honor her presence.
I'm Alan. My wife Sandra and I did a mural through Ossining Arts Council for well over 25 years, and we had the pleasure of knowing her and exhibiting with her.
I'm Dan. I think I met her when I was born, and then before I was born, and then I think was age 5 through 18 I took classes there.
I'm Christine, and met Millie in 1977, getting art lessons for this little guy here.
Hi, little guy.
And yeah, we all took lessons with Millie. She said she was the family retainer.
I'm Ben Bobkoff, and I guess I started there first. As her student, as her assistant and friend.
John Wunderlich. I met Millie through my mother, and that was all through the Ossining Arts Council, which I am currently vice president of. And my mother said, asked me after one of these openings, said, "Why don't you give Millie a ride home?" I take her, give her a ride home. "Oh, why don't you come in for a minute?" That was 3 hours later. But from that point on, it continued. I stop over just to stop in. Oh, you know, I have something to show you. And you knew that if you stopped over there, you had to have a bare minimum of 3 hours. But it wasn't like it was. You're going to see some stuff, and you're going to. It was great to know her through that aspect. I mean, she was always teaching you. But if you were there to listen, she always taught you something. Every day was a school day.
Steve.
I'm Erin Palazzolo, and I too had the good fortune and great blessing of studying with Millie from the time I was 7 until I was 17. And my whole family loves the whole Adler family. We're so happy to be here with you today. This is my mother.
And I'm the mother. I'm
My husband, Joe.
You know, there are seats up here if you want to come sit.
Please feel free to
If you want to sit, there are seats up.
I just have my baby in the back.
Sorry, we know that baby.
Millie always made you feel good. You were in there.
Go on, Steve.
I guess I will ask, you I've had the opportunity to listen to everyone else speak and try to figure out what I might say. My name is Stephen Smith, and I'm very good friends with Sharon Adler. I'm in love with her, I'm nuts with her. We happen to be married too, so that's how I met Millie, the not shy person who is always outgoing, warm, and friendly, and likes to kiss anybody who comes to visit.
Absolutely.
That's how I had the pleasure of meeting her.
And actually, you're not last. Someone just came in. We're just introducing.
Hi, Lorraine.
Lorraine.
Come join the party.
There's a seat up here.
Thank you.
So, for those of you who didn't grow up on weekends and after-school programs in Millie's, the odd collection of food that is out there is very purposeful. I think as long as people have known, there's been hummus and crackers and cheese and various things to drink. Not the sour balls. Those took a while to get.
Yeah. And figs on strings.
Oh, well, we couldn't find or didn't remember figs
Next
on
time.
So in 2005, that's live. Thanks, Steve. In 2005, we did 12 hours, because Mom had a lot to say, of taping Mom over 4 different periods. And so rather than having to, you can see her over there if you want, but I tried to condense it to something that was a remembrance, but also with some depth to it. Thank you all for joining us today. Millie's prolonged dying process really gave many of us a chance to say goodbye. And, you know, you cannot view Millie's death at 95 as a tragedy. She had a rich and long life, and everyone who encountered Millie experienced that larger-than-life persona, because to say the least, Millie was no shy, retiring flower. She expressed herself in all dimensions, as you can see. It's hard to believe one person has done so many different things here, and Sharon's going to talk about that. And she leaves us with an unbelievable body of artwork that we have to go through still. For some of you, as has been said, Mom and Dad's house was a home away from home, where you could come and be yourself, talk over your whatevers, and receive nourishment and guidance in your artistic and other pursuits. So I'm going to give you a little tour of Millie. She married Jack on October 18th, 1941, and their romance and adventure went on for 54 years until his death in 1995. Millie was the spark to Jack's reticence, the adventurer to his cautiousness, the giver of Tic Tacs to strangers, How many of you, well, I can tell you how many museums I've been embarrassed in with my mother walking up to strangers and offering them a Tic Tac and then telling them about the artwork, whether they wanted to hear or not. My parents were hand in glove for 53 years, something to aspire to. And perhaps it is best to begin with one of my father's favorite words about life and Millie. Some of you probably know this and are ready to vomit. Remarkable. That's our family word is everything is remarkable. Yes, Millie Muriel Mildred Manucha was a remarkable human being. Her not atypical immigrant tale took a genetically sturdy and gifted child and allowed her to experience all of life as a series of never-ending adventures, which I ask your forbearance on as I review it. She arrived in America at age 3, that's 1918, in steerage, as so many immigrants did through Ellis Island, and arrived to get her new name, Mildred. From the bitter lessons of learning English, through being unable to ask how to go to the bathroom and peeing in her pants in school, to fighting with the principal by refusing to be graduated from high school before the age of 15. She'd skipped 4 grades during that time and won every art award. My mother has been an artist since age 3. My mother, as you know, was unstoppable and indefatigable. Her father, Sam, is the guy up there on the top, dominated the family with his love and his benevolent dictatorship. Her constricted mother, who's to the right there, never understood her daughter or how to handle her, this wild stallion. At age 15 and a half in 1936, Mom went to work, she lied about her age, as a legal assistant for lawyers, some savory and some not so. She spoke with pride of her work for Abe Sacker, who some of you know is the founder of Brandeis University, and that was long before Brandeis was a glimmer in his eye. And despite her father's opposition, Mom went to the Art Student League in the 92nd Street Y to develop her own style. There she met Moy Stalatarov. Is he up?
Yes, he's the top face in that first drawing.
Who was her first, well actually her second mentor, as we've learned, and introduced her into the world of socialism and romanticized communism. A brief encounter with a shy man named Jack Adler went nowhere, and Mom moved into the heady avant-garde direction with her theater artistic crowd for 5 years. At the ripe old age of 20, a chance re-encounter in the Catskills found a persistent and ardent Jack Adler who would not take no for an answer. While at City College, he would pick up my mother from the 92nd Street Y, he would accompany her back to Brooklyn, and then go home to the Bronx just to spend some time with her. That was their dates. When they married in 1941, she knew Jack was going to war, and as is typical of the style of their entire relationship, she insisted that he interview to become a Japanese translator, which was limited to Phi Beta Kappa awardees. He had missed the deadline in New York. She insisted that he get on a train and go to Washington, D.C. And so began the first of the what we call the Millie-induced ventures. He became a Japanese translator that gave him 13 months in Boulder, Colorado, where he studied Japanese, and my mother actually became the art teacher to the Nisai, who were in the internment camp right near Boulder. So during World War II, Millie and Jack wrote every day. There's a series of thousands of letters that we have. Some of them are redacted because Dad was, in places that you couldn't say where they were. And she never has allowed us to give this to. There's actually a museum in Boulder that's trying to collect these things. But my mother was going to read and transcribe every single one of these thousands of letters. So they're still sitting where they are. If nothing else, what my mother has always taught us is that way leads to way, often with surprising outcome. I'm sorry this is so long. She had a long life. Back from the war, living with Jack's mother while he completed his social work degree, they moved to Washington Heights, 163rd Street, which is where I was born. Dad, in his typical dysphoric way, felt tremendously guilty that 26 members of our family were killed during World War II, and he felt the need to go to Europe, but was afraid to do it. And so Millie said, absolutely not, we're going to take our 1-year-old and we're going to go to Europe, and we'll have another adventure. And the day, we were supposed to go to Poland to work with the displaced persons, but the day we arrived in Paris was the day the Iron Curtain fell. And they were not letting Jews who got into Poland after ever out. So my mother said, no, we're not going to Poland, we're staying here in Paris. And that's where I spent my early years from age 1 to 5.5. We lived first in Paris, and then in a small village in the Italian Alps, Nazi country back then. It had the end of the line tuberculin sanatorium for displaced Jewish people who wouldn't, who couldn't go anywhere else, would never be accepted. It was during that time that Mom did a lot of her early work, and Sharon will walk you through that because some of it is up here. Being unable to admit that they actually missed America, they partly were away during most of the McCarthy era. That was not unplanned. They tell this tale that I started to ask, where were my grandparents? So, like in buying our first house, I take responsibility for moving back to America. I take responsibility for moving to Briarcliff. And if that's the story you like to hear, that's the story you like to hear. So after briefly living in New York, we moved to Hawthorne Cedar Knolls School, which some of you know very well. My dad was the chief social worker there. My sister is an art teacher there to date, so we have a long continuity with that. And again, when I turned 8, just before Sharon was born, my parents decided that they wanted to move to a community that had a good educational system. Of course, what they didn't realize was that they were, which is typical of the way my parents thought about things. What they didn't realize is that there were 10 Jews, 10 Democrats, 10 liberals in Briarcliff Manor. And so we moved to Briarcliff Manor. Again, we moved to Briarcliff Manor because I like the yard of the house that most of you know and has been there for the last 60 years. So, as you know, from 1956 to 2008, who was in the last class?
The youngest people here from Millie's classes are probably
I think they left.
Dan and Max and Sean.
So, hundreds of children, some of you have passed through the doors of the Millie Adler Art Studio to learn from this unique teacher more about life than about art, as she would say. While always identified as an artist, it's really as a teacher that Millie showed her genius. And as you also know, because as you look around and you see so many different variants of work, Millie was constantly restless, and when she thought that she was getting lazy about her art in 1960, when did she start at Pratt?
I don't remember the exact year.
When you were 3? Right, so at the ripe old age of 3, Millie decided that she would go to Pratt Graphic Art and learn graphics, and she studied with many people. I think we're going to talk about that, so I won't. And as you know, we have this printing press in the basement. Thankfully, somebody's interested in it. How they're going to get out this 4,000-pound modified press that my mother used, we don't know. But my mother always was restless, and she was always pushing Jack beyond his comfort zone. And so they traveled the world, places both commonly traveled and places that we can no longer go.
I have the list.
Oh my
I have
God.
the list.
Okay, you can tell the list.
Okay.
I'm almost done. Each time Millie returned, there was new art and new ideas for teaching. And each summer from 1953, we went to Cape Cod, where I have gone almost every year. And that's a long time now, 61 years on the Cape, with a few years off. And that became a family tradition. Even with Dad's prostate cancer diagnosis, they went about their adventures, including Mom's accompanying Dad through the dying process. In the many years since Dad's death and Mom's assumption of his anxiety load, 266 Dalmany Road became her, quote, warren and her country. Traveling little except to New York City, Mom had the world come to her, as she has today, with all of us gathered to send her off back into the cosmos. Her last two trips as herself were to celebrate the wedding of John and Jonathan on the Cape and our annual Thanksgiving gathering of our small family. As always, Mom was a force of nature, entertaining, offering Tic Tacs to everyone, and offering her work to those far and wide. She offered, at the wedding, John's mentor, she offered a painting to. I don't know if it ever happened, but that was...
Oh, yes, it did.
It did.
And she brought him a selection to choose from.
Okay. But then the inevitable happened with hip fractures, probably small strokes, and a slow loss of her personality into dementia. This woman, who never expected to live past 30 and assured us she was going to kill herself should she ever need to be dependent, showed again her remarkable resilience, adapting to full-time care in our own home. Even as a shell of who she was, Millie was repetitively grateful to her days in her, quote, in my own home, my country. With only a present for a long time, she was able to take joy in the sunlight on the window, a book, a poem. She would still be able to recite poetry even when she couldn't remember anything else. A picture or a painting that brought her back to the long and full life she had, at least for a moment. Uncomplainingly and with grace and dignity, she faded into the night several times, reminding us that she was about to embark on a new venture. She said, a long journey, as at last, among the last of her generation, she joins the legions who have gone before her. For me, Mom's death concretizes my own relationship to the continuity of life. At 68, I am finally an orphan with no parents between me and the great unknown. Her dying process has been another of those life events that has affirmed for me my own desire to be connected to those I love, to pursue those that really matter to me, to try and disencumber myself from smallness one can become swept into. Mom, you have helped me and many more achieve this and much more. You are part of us, of me. We will miss you. And I just want to end with a poem that she insisted be read at Dad's funeral by an unknown poet. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond that glints on the snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I'm not going to make it. I am gentle autumn's rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft star that shines at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I do not die.
Thank you, David.
Sorry to lather on.
Okay, this is synchronicity. It was so much a part of Millie's life. The poem that David just read, I was thinking of reading. And
What happens when you're the little sister?
And a few years ago, I sing with two choruses. I sing with the Croton Chorale and with the Hudson Chorale, and some of my fellow singers are here today to celebrate Millie's life with us. And, excuse me, Matt. We sang that poem.
No.
And it is the most gorgeous melody. Thank you. And I could barely get through the piece without crying. Not because it reminded me of anybody in particular, but that it encapsulated the spirit of Millie, of Jack, of everybody who I love who's passed away. And so thank you so much for reading that. What a great segue, right? Now, I could talk all day about my mother. So what I'm going to say is going to be like a collage, which was really her favorite medium, and the medium through which she taught her students how to think and how to see the world.
So before I start reading some of Millie's writings and tell you about what you see around you, I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone who's here for coming. The room is full of love. It's pulsating with love. I can feel it. And Millie is smiling at us. It's a beautiful day. We're all here together to celebrate her. So there are a number of people. I want to thank everybody, first of all, for being here. But the people who made this gathering possible, I want to thank them. I want to thank Mark and John and the Ossining Arts Council for opening up the space to us. When I was wondering, well, what can we do and where can we do this to remember Millie, I started going through files that she had of exhibition brochures. Now, Millie was not organized. Okay? She was always on to the next thing. And whatever happened yesterday was past. You were in the present moment and you were planning ahead. But most of all, you were in the present moment. And so I found a brochure for a 60-year retrospective that she had in 1996 at the Ossining Arts Council Gallery, which at that time was on Spring Street, across the road here. And it was called Reverberations. And that is really what Millie was all about, and she's reverberating in this room. So this exhibit is Reverberations number 2. So I also want to thank Javiera and her whole family, her sister Beltra, her daughter Daniela. Without the Gutierrez family, we would have had to put Millie in a nursing home. But because of them, we were able to keep her in her home. And she died in her home. And it was her nest, and it was her collage. And there are pictures of her studio classroom in a display case, which you can look at. And you can see that the environment that her students came into was a collage, and then she taught them through that medium to think creatively. And her favorite question was, what if? So I want to thank my daughter Sarah, my son-in-law Roger, my husband Steve, for helping me bring all the stuff from her house up the stairs. Roger and Sarah hung the whole show. One of the members of the Ossining Arts Council made these wonderful labels. I was going to print them out on the computer. I'm so glad I delegated that because it really gives a finishing touch to the artwork. I want to thank Howard for being here. Howard's one of my colleagues. He's a filmmaker and a visual artist. He works with my students doing film animation, and he pieces together all their short films to a finished product. Once a year we have a showing of their work. And Millie was one of the first art teachers at Hawthorne Cedar Knolls, and when I was hired there 22 years ago, I really made it my mission to continue her legacy as a teacher. And one of the most important things I learned from Millie, working with emotionally disturbed children, because Hawthorne Cedar Knolls is a residential treatment center, it is, at least nowadays, the end of the road for children who cannot be educated in schools. And they are sent to Hawthorne from the family court in New York City. We're now getting a lot of students from upstate New York. At the time Millie was there, it was mostly Jewish children. There actually was a need for a place to send Jewish delinquents. So they sent them to Hawthorne. And Jewish. Yes. And so she had some very interesting and distinguished students, and some of them kept in touch with her and with Jack. One was a woman who did a lot of illustrations for the New York Times op-ed page. Another was a man who became the timpanist of the New York Philharmonic. So even to this day, children who start out at Hawthorne with difficulties go on to lead productive lives. And it is because of their teachers. Really it is, to help them succeed in the world. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to read a few things that Millie wrote and a few things that people wrote about her. And then we'll open up this, we consider it a circle, even though the room wasn't big enough to make it a circle. We're going to open up to the circle so that anybody who wants to can share a memory, a story, or just even a word. So I'm going to start out by telling you this that Millie wrote. Well, actually, Millie was interviewed many times, so I have found many transcripts of interviews. And this was with Judith Hassan, who wrote for the local newspaper, and it is dated 1977. And Millie said, "I never started out with the idea that I was going to teach art. I think that my own enthusiasm and love for what I was doing always seemed to communicate to other people, and they would say, 'Oh, how I wish I could do that,' or 'if only I had talents.' My own philosophy is that every human being is born with this potential. What happens to it is a consequence of the kind of education and society we live in," says Muriel Adler. Here's another thing that Muriel actually wrote this, and it was entitled, "Celebrating the Creative Process." Thank you. Hopefully I won't need it again. "I believe every human being is endowed with a creative potential. Since 1941, I have taught the visual arts in the most varied circumstances to people of every age, from preschool to the 80s, to those who come with the natural talent of future Picassos or Da Vinci's, and to those whose first self-introduction is, quote, 'I can't draw a straight line.' I have been art teacher to the poor and to the rich, to the healthy and to the physically, mentally, and emotionally handicapped. Since we moved to Briarcliff in 1955, I have been able to provide in my studios an environment, facilities, and techniques to nurture and promote this belief in human creativity. Each technique is a discipline to be mastered, but always and foremost leaving room for the individual's personality, perception, fantasy, and beliefs. To engage in the creative process, to submit to the arduous, inspiring, and sometimes frustrating pursuit of making an idea, a perception, or experience visible to others, is an act of sharing, which provides its own unique rewards." And she wrote that in 19. Yeah, she was here a long time. 1989. So there are just a couple of things I wanted to add to the wonderful biography that David outlines. When she came here from Russia, it was, from her story at least, the last boat of immigrants. And Russia at the time was not a friendly place to Jews. There were pogroms. It was really a place they had to escape in order to survive. Now, Millie inherited her sense of adventure from her father, Sam. And she was built very much like him, peasant stock. Sam was the only person to go up on deck on the ship in a storm. There was nobody else on deck. He took Millie with him. She was 3 years old, and he put her on his shoulders so she could get a good view of the storm. So I think that's where the sense of adventure comes from. I'm sure it started even before that. when they arrived in Ellis Island, they didn't know what to do with the name Menucha. Okay, Menucha is a Hebrew word, and one of the translations of it is peace. Now, I don't think anybody here associates the word peace with Millie or with her personality, but she could have her peaceful moments. So her nickname, what she was affectionately called by her family, was Mirla. And so they looked for this list starting with M, and this happened to thousands and thousands of immigrants at Ellis Island. They gave her a new name. And what was that name? It was a name that she really didn't like. Mildred. Because it started with M and it had the I sound in it. So Mildred adopted the name Merrill as her professional name because it was Mirla, which is the diminutive. Never used Mildred except when she signed a check. And even on her checks it said Mildred Adler, a.k.a. No, it said, yeah, Mildred Adler, a.k.a. Merrill Adler. Just in case you didn't know that she was Merrill and not Mildred. So I could start with the pictures on this wall, even though we have it numbered from this way. These are the earliest drawings, and the drawing with the multiple faces. The face at the top is Moy Solitar. Moy Solitar was Merrill's mentor, and he's the one who taught her that artists have a responsibility to society. And in that era, the artist's responsibility was to change society, which they attempted to do. There was a course at the 92nd Street Y given by Moy Solitar. It was a theater arts workshop. Moy Solitar was born in Russia. He came here in the 1930s. From about 1909 to 1929, he was one of the set designers for Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. Now, the Ballet Russe did not really have a home. It was an itinerant ballet company that started in Paris, and then they toured all over Europe, and they even toured North America and South America. So, although I don't know the real story of how Moy and his family ended up in New York, I suspect that on tour he must have decided to stay. And so Millie studied with him for many years, first at the 92nd Street Y. At the end of the course, the young people who were Moy's students, they wanted to continue learning from him. So Millie scoured the streets of New York for a place where Moy could live with his family and they could continue their studies with him. They found a brownstone in the neighborhood of the 92nd Street Y. At that time, I don't really understand why, but there were buildings that were vacant, and they called them taxpayers. So Merrill and her group of friends all worked day jobs. She worked as a legal secretary.
This is when she was 18, right?
She was, yeah, starting I think at age 17 or 18. They pooled their resources. They supported Moy's family. They met every night after work. They painted. They had to research artists and present papers to one another. It was a comprehensive art education, which then Millie did in her own studio. She patterned her way of teaching after Moy. There was a huge art library. She started out every class talking about at least one artist, and from there the students would fan out, look at books, gather ideas, come back to do their own artwork. So the other faces in that picture are of, the top left is Jean, who was a very close friend of Millie's. The other faces are her son, not her brother, Jack, whom she called Jackie. and her mother, Sarah. All right, so those are the faces. Millie was very, very close to her younger brother, who was about 3.5 years younger. He was born shortly after they arrived in New York. They did everything together. Her brother was also a poet. He grew up to be a biology teacher at Samuel Tilden High School. He always, like Millie, was learning something new. And very often that was in the form of a craft. He learned to hook rugs. He hooked me a beautiful rug which I had in my bedroom growing up, and then it became one of Sarah's rugs. Remember the rug? Long time ago. Okay, let's move on. Sam Stangen, was an upholsterer, and at heart he was a poet. And one of the things that we found in the house was a binder filled with his poems written in Yiddish. And one of my projects is going to be to find someone to translate his poems. We did find one translated poem which was written at the end of World War II, and the theme of the poem was brotherhood. And my grandfather mailed a copy of it to FDR, and we have a typewritten letter from one of FDR's secretaries thanking my grandfather for his friendliness. So there's quite a nice souvenir of that era. The oil portrait of Jack was done in 1943. So Jack would have been 28 years old. The portraits are interesting because knowing how Millie learned to paint portraits, which was more of this style, which she learned under Robert Brackman at the Art Students League, Moy's style was more loose. You saw the brush strokes, you felt the energy, and I really think that this portrait combines the classical academic portrait and the style that Moy taught his students. And there's a portrait of my grandmother, Sarah, and I think that portrait is interesting because it captures a number of things about my grandmother's personality. My grandmother totally adored her grandchildren, and I'm sure she loved her daughter, but as my brother said, she didn't understand Millie at all. When Millie would cry, she would say in Yiddish, "There you go again, peeing with your eyes." When she would come to visit in Briarcliff, she'd say to my mother, "What do you do here, talk to the trees?" I guess she did talk to the trees. So the portrait kind of captures the physical frailty of my grandmother and a little bit of edge of bitterness, which I never really saw in my grandma, but you knew it was there, and you didn't quite understand why, because she had this, well, maybe it has something to do with her domineering husband, but he had a huge personality from what I hear. I never had the pleasure of knowing him personally. You were very young when he died.
Yes, but I remember, he would, this could go on forever, but he would make me take his finger like this and pull, and then he would fart. So my grandfather died.
Okay, well, the portrait here is one of Meryl's series, The Faces of New York, and she did these in sepia printing ink, and the ink was rolled for her by her assistant, Eric Greatlips, who was in New York on a Fulbright scholarship. She met him at Pratt Graphic Center in Manhattan, and he would take these big rollers, which were about this wide, and a diameter of about 9 inches, and she'd roll up the plate, and then she'd carve the faces into it and print them on her printing press. So that was part of the series, and these are Ken Hyman, who's here today, and Millie probably did about 400 portraits of Ken. And we just picked out two that kind of captured the breadth of what she was able to do with his face. And this one she called a hypnagogic portrait. And the hypnagogic moment is that moment just before sleep, where you are falling into sort of a dream state. And Millie said that many of her ideas came to her in those moments. So she captures that in this. If you look closely, the eyes are both open and closed. And then this one is Poseidon at ebb tide, with things that Millie found on the beach in Cape Cod, and combine them with Ken's face. And here, this is me at age 68. That would make me, I was about 12 when I sat for that portrait. And I remember sitting very well because usually Millie worked very quickly and it didn't take her a long time. But this portrait I sat multiple sittings for in my red dress. And that's why I wore this today, because it reminded me of the dress I wore in this portrait, sitting next to the oak chest from 15th century Flemish times on an equally old bench and just sitting quietly and thinking. And on the back of this, Millie wrote a quote from T.S. Eliot, something about in the contemplative moment there is the dance, which is interesting because I've always loved to dance, and I still do. A portrait of David from sometime in the 1950s, I think. You were probably, how old do you think you might have been?
That ain't me. That's an idealized me.
That's, well, but it is you.
Yeah, 8, 9.
8 or 9. So this is a portrait Millie did at the Art Students League, where she studied, I think at about age 16, with Robert Brackman, who was a very famous portrait artist. And those of you who know classic movies might have seen The Portrait of Jenny with Joseph Cotton and Jennifer Jones, which dates from the 1940s. He painted the portrait of Jenny that is in that film. And Jennifer Jones later married David Selznick, who then owned the portrait of Jenny. Well, Millie got to a point in studying with Brackman that she felt she had learned everything he had to teach her. So she moved on and then went to the Art Students League. And this is a still life that she did at the Art Students League while she was studying with Brackman. This is a still life that she did in Paris in her studio when they lived in Paris after World War II, and the study in watercolor for it. Millie began to explore what she referred to as archetypes, which are universal symbols. And her absolute favorite book was the dictionary. If there was a word Millie didn't know, she'd open up the dictionary and she would read the definition. And if there was a word in the definition that she didn't understand, she would read the definition. And it would go on and on and on. And we would sometimes do this together. And it became a game. And we would laugh because we would end up reading the whole book. Her second favorite book, I think, was Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, which is a treatise about the meaning of symbols universally. So this is what she called cycladic figure. It is a print, actually, done on her printing press without any ink on dampened paper. When the paper was dry, she took colored pencils and she called it illuminated embossment. She illuminated the figure and what really was, I think, in her mind, a shrine. She has many shrines in her artwork, and some of them are represented on this wall. The second piece is a monotype, meaning a single impression of a print. It is the Hudson River and the Palisades. She did a big series of the river in all its moods. She loved the river. Jack and Millie would walk along the river at Rockwood Hall often and enjoy it in all kinds of weather and in all seasons. It also has a plate that she did as a photo etching, so it combines several different processes into one impression. The big canvas, and here is called Inception. Yeah, it's called Inception. Millie was always experimenting with materials. She wanted to achieve in her painting something that she could do in the print, which was to have an impression. So she did the equivalent of that in the painted canvas by carving it with a knife, and it was Celotex insulation board, which is a great insulator. It's very hard. And after doing several of those canvases, this one and the large one of Persephone, she actually got a repetitive stress injury, and she had to stop doing her artwork for a while until her wrist went back to normal. She found, somebody brought her a box full of plastic lenses, so of course Millie's thinking, what can I do with those lenses? And they became the center of Inception, and under each lens is a dab of paint. When I look at it, I think that the lines going in and out from the center bear resemblance to what you might see in Navajo rugs, which always have something, some kind of line where the design can enter and exit. So that really goes beyond the boundaries of the image through the lines. The print that has 8 images is a self-portrait that she did using 4 different plates, 2 different color studies with each plate. And she did those at Pratt Graphic Center. And then there's Persephone. You may know the Greek myth of Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter. She was kidnapped by the god of the underworld, Hades. And Persephone pined for her mother, and Demeter pined for her daughter. And Persephone knew that if she ate anything in the underworld, she would have to stay there forever. So she only ate 6 seeds of a pomegranate. And as a result, she was allowed to leave the underworld for 6 months out of the year, and that is why we have spring and summer. So that's Persephone in the underworld, and again, a shrine-like container for her. And next to that is Ramayani, who is the Nepalese goddess of creativity, and she is in a shrine. Millie did a series that she called Shrines, and they were a result of their journeys in India, Nepal, and Japan. We actually brought the puppet here. It's on a table with refreshments. An interesting story about Ramayani is that at one point Millie cut the control bars off the marionette. In some of the prints you see the puppet almost holding those control bars, but in others they are absent. And I would come to the house and rarely went into the room where Ramayani was, but one day I went in there and Javiera followed me in and she said to me, you know, the strangest thing happens with that puppet. Sometimes I come into the room and I find the puppet on the floor. And I put it back on the shelf, and I come back and the puppet's on the floor. And so that's a mystical experience. I think the puppet knew that Millie was fading and that it was expressing that by falling off the shelf. Wondering, where is Millie? I miss her. So that's Brahmayani. And I did a lot of Googling and researching Millie's prints. And one of the things I found that was interesting was that Brahmayani was one of 9 goddesses. And when you combined all these goddesses together in the Nepalese pantheon, you came up with one goddess who was the goddess who alleviated human suffering. And Brahmayani was the first goddess to emerge from this mother goddess's body. And together, the 9 goddesses killed all the demons. And the demons were anger, envy, lust, all the negative emotions. Next to that, one of the transformation series, Millie and Jack went to the northwestern states in the United States and also Canada. Of course, totems are important symbols in many cultures. They're representatives of people. They are messengers. There are many interesting stories about animal messengers. I just have to tell you one that happened the other day when I went to Millie's house and Joan and Marcel came from Vancouver to be here. And before I picked them up at the train station, I went to the house and there was a rabbit in the front lawn. I'd never seen this cottontail before. I went to him. He didn't budge. He just kept munching on the clover. I said hello to him. I went in the house. I said, Javier, did you see the rabbit out front? And I went down to the station to pick up John. So I come back to the house. The rabbit's still, but I believe it was a messenger from Millie. Thank you, Millie. The last piece on the wall there is a woodcut that Millie did. We had 2 willow trees that Jack planted as twigs. They grew to be so enormous that shortly after I was married in 1982, they cut down the trees because they were afraid that in a storm they would crush the house. They were huge, and I used to play under those trees, and I used to hang by my knees from the limbs and look at the world upside down. And speaking of trees, Millie loved trees. I think she was a druid. And she would, if she saw some child in a tree at Rockwood Hall while we were walking there, she would tell the child, look through the branches, look at the sky. You see the negative spaces, aren't they beautiful? So Millie was always teaching people to see. The last thing I want to do, because I don't want to go on forever, though I could, I want to read a poem that Millie wrote. And it is beautiful, and it is expressive of her art. Let me just find it. I don't know what year this was written, but it was probably in the last 10 years of her life. And it's entitled See. I see life's design, a spotlit collage, dried rosebuds lost of scent, a bicolored fresh azalea in a plastic bowl, the pink azalea with a red magenta spotted center radiating leopard light, new green leaves pleading, plant me in the earth. I will grow and heal you by your glance, will connect you to everything accidental which talks to you of life. The little seashell nestling in the coiled pink weather-worn fossil, rescued from the shore of Lago de Garda. I am collecting evidence of this long chain which has been my life, forging now my last links of a life in art, a nanosecond in the living body of time, encapsulated in a flake of paint which has peeled and sprung from a hard surface.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah.
Our kids have been very compliant for now. That's why the whole thing will fall apart. Okay, so yes, I've managed to come out of our haze to write a little something that I wanted to say. Okay, so I'm John, I'm Millie's grandson, and it is amazing, if not surprising, to have so many of you here. And since I'm sure many people want to share their thoughts, I will keep mine brief, I promise. Millie was a star. She radiated light and heat, and you couldn't resist her twinkling. And when you got within even a few million light years of her, you got sucked into her orbit. Her gravitational pull was equal opportunity. It got you, whether you were her grandkid, her student, her bank teller, or her museum tour guide graciously handing over the commentary to this ebullient and curious person. The energy she emitted was fundamentally vivifying, making things bloom equally for people who sought it out, and in sometimes unexpected and unlikely places. For those of us in her innermost orbit, life without her force was basically unimaginable. We thrived on her warmth, wrestled with her pull, and occasionally felt the shadow that other things, her work, her anxiety, her latest obsession, sometimes cast. But like any fixture in the firmament, it was hard to comprehend her absence. Reaching back to my undergraduate astronomy courses, I remember that stars go out in one of two ways. While the drama of the supernova might have been fitting, Millie went the path of smaller stars that very gradually exhaust their fuel and fizzle out. But I also remember that mass is neither created nor destroyed, and in cases like this, matter is simply transformed into energy, which is sent out into the universe to be collected by other celestial bodies. I think I pushed the metaphor as far as it can reasonably go. But I do feel that our gathering here today actually represents that nicely. Even if the laws of physics say it doesn't work this way, I feel like we've all been brought together again by Millie's gravitational pull, and this ceremony may be the last convergence of her scattered stardust in the same room. Words really don't do justice to the legacy of having Millie in our family. She and Jack were as present as long-distance grandparents can be, especially in Eliza and my earlier years. Together, they were beacons of magic for us. They turned trees into energy stations on family shows. And they brought gifts which they had made. Fanciful and functional riding toys, doll houses, and general stores that were both far more substantial and also far less circumscribed in their potential than the best Fisher-Price offering. As we grew up and our lives deepened and got richer, Millie always wanted to know what excited us. As you know, she was omnivorously curious. Of course, she always loved that theater was a big part of my life. When I was in high school, she invited me to spend a weekend with her, taking 3 long days in the city, riding the double-deck tourist buses, walking through the Met, and taking me to my first Broadway show, Les Mis. She also took to regularly proclaiming even the most mundane moments, theater, with a capital T, a practice she kept up for the rest of our life, no matter how mundane. Some of you know, and my dad mentioned, I wrote my college application essay about Millie, which I called The Risks and Benefits of Accepting Tic Tacs from Strangers, and which my parents forced me to read at her 80th birthday celebration. And I will spare you that today.
I have it if you want to read it.
I have 4 college essays.
Right, you just killed, right. So I'll spare you today mostly because I now know, thanks to Sharon, that roughly 3/4 of the people in this room also wrote their college essays. Off to college and later grad school, the demands and enticements of everyday life, coupled with the geographical distance, pulled me somewhat further from Millie's orbit, and then her star began to fade. But I feel the way I'm sure you all do, that her presence is never far from us.
Or in the next room.
My partner and I moved into a new house this past December, and just about every wall displays one of Millie's works. The photo Steve Sherman took of Millie and Jack that so captures their essence, which is out there, smiles down on our kids from the collage on our playroom wall, so she continues to share her warmth with us every day. Of course, our gathering here today is bittersweet, loss mingled with celebration, but I feel so grateful to be here with all of you to remember, to grieve, to rejoice, and to recollect Millie's stardust one last time.
We're going to have Ken say a few words.
My name is Ken Hyman, and Millie was my best friend. I met her shortly after my wife and 3 children moved to Briarcliff, and I was given the assignment, I'm a photographer, given the assignment of photographing suburbia. I didn't know where to begin, so I began in the high school. And as I went through the high school, I was given by the principal, a lovely young woman, I think her name was Sharon Adler, to show me the different classrooms. And I would explain in each classroom what the project was of photographing suburbia. At the end of the tour, Sharon said, you know, there's a wonderful art teacher in town. You might want to photograph her. She didn't say it was her mother, but she gave me the phone number. And the next day I visited Millie. And after several hours I hadn't taken a picture, but I called my wife and said, there'll be 2 people for dinner tonight. And Millie and Jack came over for dinner, and with my 3 little children, and there was an immediate bondage of love. They became the children's grandparents. And actually after a while we saw them, usually Thursday evening for dinner. They would come up and play with the grandkids. After a couple of years, my family and I moved to Westport. And Millie I knew there was a hole for Millie because she missed the family so much. So I made it a point of once a week coming up and visiting her. And usually the conversation was they were worried about Sharon at college. And I said, oh, she's going to be all right. And after a year or so, Millie said, you know, I have a creative block. I've stopped. I can't do my art. She turned to me and she said, I'd like to do your portrait. Not like these 2 over here, but... And what happened was a strange thing that I photographed a lot of artists and many celebrities. And when Millie started painting the portrait, suddenly our conversation went to a much higher level. I don't know if some of you have experienced that, where somebody's doing their work and they can do their work and suddenly the conversation is at a much higher level. And so, almost every week when I went up there, at least every other week, she would do another portrait of me. And one of the things, since I've worked with a lot of artists, you don't criticize the art. You just accept it. This is what the artist does. I mean, I couldn't say, oh, I don't look that ugly. And we just enjoyed a long relationship and I was working for Life magazine and doing a lot of traveling around the world. And whenever I came back, I would show Millie my work. And I know that when you visited, a lot of those those photographs on the wall were mine, and she would pick. She said, "Oh, could I have that?" And she'd put it up on her wall. So I just want to say that I do miss her, and it was an extraordinary experience to know and love Millie.
First a minute, Steve. Can you say something? No. No.
I could follow up on what Ken said.
Okay, good. Go do it.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I will. Just because I'm going to follow up on what Ken said. One thing. My name is Steve Sherman. I started with Millie when I was in 4th grade. And I've since become a professional photographer. And yes, I can point to Millie as the source of my entire knowledge of art, composition, light, dark, color, etc. But it was Ken's photos sitting in her studio as a 4th grader that I looked at, black and white images of people, hands, this one image of just old hands that was so stunning. This was the first time I had ever seen photography as art. I had grown up and dragged along to museums. Millie took me to museums. My parents took me to museums. I saw art, and I knew art, and I loved art. But photography was my dad coming home from a vacation and showing us slides. Or pictures of the family, pictures of people we knew, or people I didn't know, but they were in the news. And suddenly, I look at these photographs, and it transcends. And so I have to just follow Ken by saying thank you to you for giving me my entire career in life. And of course to Millie for giving me not only that, but teaching me how to conduct my life, how to be, how to create, how to stick with a project, how to think about a project, how to think about anything, how to interact with people, how not to interact with people. These things, when I said Millie was my second mother and Jack wasn't quite the second father because he wasn't quite there as much, but as I got to know them, they both embraced and became embraced. This is where I learned so much of life. And so this gathering today for me is that special. And so thank you for all being here because you all know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, go.
It's hard to say goodbye to your favorite mentor. So I didn't think I was going to get this upset. But
I don't do Tic Tacs, but I do Kleenex.
She was my teacher first, and then she became a friend. I worked for her. In a lot of ways, she became part of our family. I take a lot of what she taught me into the classroom today, as I'm a teacher at the School of Visual Arts. And I think we all know she's super, super open to everything from knowledge, creativity, serendipity. And I try my best to bring it into the classroom. Oddly, some students are not open to it, but in a lot of ways we became kind of kindred spirits over time. So first I was a student, avidly following all of her unusual lessons, really not like any art lesson you would have in high school or middle school. And that went on well, and then one day we got into a big argument. So I brought the big argument with me today. So she was teaching process, and she was teaching linoleum cuts. And in her lesson, we were translating probably a drawing into a linoleum cut, and the idea is to remove what you don't want and the line that's going to make the impression, learning to scale. But I could follow her, but I couldn't follow the other teachers. And I had this weird idea of doing the exact opposite of what I was trying to teach, and she thought I was missing it completely. Not getting the lesson, I thought, wow, what if it was not what she's saying and everything's black? And then you go the other way and make the line. So here's what happened. We had a very heated discussion up in that little balcony area over the room, and she was determined that I'd do this, and I was determined that I would do that. And it was probably the first time I ever really stood my ground with art. And finally we ended up with a truce, which is maybe where we started to become friends rather than teacher and student. And the truce was, I could do my way if I did her way. So I got two different impressions here, and it's also from Millie's living room. That's the chest of drawers you might know in the living room. And
It's now in my house.
no, in your house, yeah. So then she had us do all different kinds of techniques, from coloring behind, printing with paper, and a monoprint. But I guess this is where we started to switch from one role to another. And I think after this I got hired to be the teaching assistant for Millie. So that was great. She was very, I guess she was definitely very accepting. I was a very conservative eater. So I stayed there all day, and she would specially make food that I was willing to eat. In there, we'd have our lunch together. And she shared her whole life, like things she learned from other people. And during our lunches, she was trying to teach me how to eat. And one of the lessons was on eating artichokes, that she didn't know how to eat them when she went to Paris. And her friend, she had a very good friend there, maybe the one who made the tables with the time. Yeah. So the friend taught her the correct way to eat artichokes, and she wasn't going to have me grow up not knowing it either. So she taught me that. And it was great. Our collaboration kept going after I went to college because I designed part of reverberations. I had a big show in Chappaqua years ago, and though I had a lot of artwork, I couldn't fill it, and Jack and Millie were my co-artists to my show, so we had a big show together. So it was great. I would tell her what was going on in the classroom. She'd give me her ideas of how to do things. I think there's a lot of influence. I became a photographer, but she always gave us, she never felt anything should be limited, you know, and we learned to process all the time, and I now combine completely different art with my photography, doing a combination of computer art with photography. So I think that also comes from those ideas of being open and combining anything like you see on the wall there. So she's just a great mentor, and when my grandmother passed away, she slowly worked her way in and kind of became a grandmother to my brother and me, and filled in with my dad, and we did a lot of family events with Millie. So I have many more stories I could probably tell, but this is the first time I can tell one story, because Jack told me a story. He says, don't ever let Millie know the story. So they loved each other very much, as we know, and she was very visually observant. We used to share seeing the same thing when we walked into a room. This must have rubbed off on Jack, and she must have been telling him what she was seeing and how to look at things. So Jack told me that during the war, he was on a ship in the Pacific, and something caught his eye on the deck. And a sniper shot at him, but because he bent down to look at this little white piece of parachute fabric, the bullet missed him, and he survived. But he didn't want Millie to know because he thought she'd be way too upset. So now I can finally tell that story. Yeah, but yeah.
I have to say something to you.
Yeah.
2 weeks before she passed away,
Yeah.
she was looking at the picture on the wall. I never saw you before.
Oh.
But I know you because it's me. She was waiting for your phone call, and she wanted you to come to see her. And she loved you so much.
That's true. Well, I don't have her magic wand with me today, but she would play fairy grandmother.
I have the magic wand.
Oh, you do?
It's actually a baton with streamers coming out of both ends.
Yeah, she would turn it on, and if you had a wish
Well, I
for a
gave
home,
it to her.
yeah, we would ask her to wave on us. So I hope she's waving that on us today. Thank you.
So for a little comic relief here, I'll have 1 pint of the fountain of youth. That is how Millie greeted many baffled waiters in restaurants. When she'd say, they would say, what will you have? I'll have 1 pint of the Fountain of Youth. Millie remained vital well into her late 80s. She managed to find that fountain within herself as she joyfully entertained anyone who would stop and listen. Millie joked, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. She gave voice to what mattered to her on account of because she wanted to bring everyone along on the adventure she made of her life. In her voice, some of the phrases I remember best were, awareness is the greatest gift. Even in misfortune, one needs to be lucky. Wherever our family is, we are doing good. There is something in the universe that is beating its heart for you. I feel magical being in my own house. Look, in every window pane, a different landscape. I'm so lucky. I am a time travel clock these days. Even a nanosecond can be many lifetimes. I am about to go on a long adventure, which was her reference, of course, to death. I will close with a poem Millie composed for me in celebration of a birthday. I don't remember which one, but it was so very Millie-ish, you'll all resonate with it. Love is a collage of many shapes and colors, an accumulation of scraps of beautiful encounters that keep resonating long after farewells. Love is never static, is directed and received from multitudinous streams and rivulets. Fortune brought us together, David the medium, but we have formed our own singular relationship, which also shifts and changes as life does, becoming richer as it is fertilized by open search and sharing. I thank Millie, as so many of you do, for teaching me how to grow up and how to live.
Some of this will be redundant. I was thinking of 2 words that describe Millie, and the 2 words were vibrant warmth. Vibrant warmth. Her eyes enveloped you in her gaze, surrounded you with her interest. She reminded me of my mother, a stocky, well-built figure with short brown hair and brown eyes, a radiating presence, down to earth, as honest as she could be, because honesty wasn't a choice. It was just the way she emoted. A force field so large, it was hard to emerge as a separate self, an individuated self out of her orbit. So it took some doing, as it does for all of us, for Sharon and for me, to become the people we were meant to be. Not our mother's vision of us, but our own intuition of where we belong in the world. In that sense, Sharon and I share the sisterhood of having had warm, wonderful, and dominating mothers. But on the whole, I think we came out ahead. In a world that is often cold and uncaring, we have the memory of a sustaining warmth, like an eternal fireplace to carry us on through life.
I'm Peter Rush. I was being a family who moved back, I think we moved a month or two before you did.
Yes, right.
Which means that when your family did the survey of the number of Jews, there might have been one short when you actually moved, because my father was Jewish and we moved in June of '55.
What's a Jew? Take or leave it.
A lot. David and I were classmates, very close friends, and we were neighbors on the other end of the same street. So we spent a lot of time together, and I have two younger brothers and a sister who all would love to have been here today. My brother Tim, some people may know him, had unfortunately a very good friend had died, and their funeral ceremony was today back in Virginia, so I couldn't make it. And my other brother Barney, some people know, is actually running for local office, and the election is Tuesday, so he's campaigning the last weekend. And my sister Lucy is on the West Coast and couldn't make a long trip. But they're all here in spirit, and I have a few remarks from each of them to add to my own remarks. David and I, as close friends, I got to see Millie up front and close during our junior high and high school years. I have recollection, and one emblematic recollection, which brings a little dimension that hasn't been mentioned so far. We would often, especially when the weather was bad in the afternoon, we would spend hours down playing Monopoly in the basement, or Parcheesi, but Monopoly is the one I remember. And afterwards, we would come upstairs, and Millie would serve us cookies and, I think, milk at the little table they had in their kitchen on the side there. And Millie would ask questions, and these were not chit-chat questions, they weren't banal questions, they were penetrating questions. I would approach each episode when we would have that with some trepidation, but also kind of an excitement of the challenge of being able to respond to the kind of questions that she would ask. They made you think, they probed you, and they reflected her humanity, her compassion, her warmth, her love, her curiosity, her intellectual seriousness. And I remember to this, one time I think she was probing me about a paper I'd done on frogs for junior high school. That's just stuck in my mind. And that was the kind of person, I think we all witnessed that as well. But this is, apart from her interest in art, she was that kind of person, completely alive, and someone who I'm just so grateful to have had in my life. And I've certainly visited numbers of times after leaving home on various occasions, as did the rest of my family. Now, I also took several of our art classes, and even though I still have problems with parts of modern art, the appreciation that I have for modern art came from the art appreciation classes that I had with her. I also had the occasion, that must have been about 2 years ago, to visit, and I hadn't actually known of her mental decline, and at that point there was no short-term memory. I think she knew it was me part of the time, and the other part of the time she thought it was David. Yeah. However, even in that situation, her energy was still there. I mean, even though her personality was seriously degraded, it was still Millie, and I'm so glad I had that last opportunity, even though it wasn't really a two-way communication, to see her then. Now, beyond that, Millie meant a great deal to my parents. Jack and Millie, and my parents, Bert and Betsy's, a few people here know who they are, were best friends as well. And I think that Millie was my mother's best friend of all. They were said to have dinner parties together. They were all part of the same group of other friends. And I just want to read a few more remarks from my brother Barney, who captures even better than I could what Millie meant for my mother. He said that, "What a wonderful friendship Mom had with Millie. Mom treasured the walks they took, sometimes just on the golf course that was off our street there.
Trump golf course now.
Yeah, God help us. Other times going to the Rockefeller Estates."
But there are none of those here.
I think Mom really admired Millie's confidence and zest, and leaned on her for support when she was feeling particularly insecure or troubled. Millie showed Mom not just how the next day was to be faced with grit, but how it might be savored too. And I have one memory of Millie's describing how the family coped when they all went to Paris. And I don't know if this was the time we talked about, and we're shocked to find how expensive it was. Millie found some contraption, a stick with a heating element, which could be stuck directly into an open soup can, and voila, heated dinner. Whether I heard this from Millie or from Mom, I can no longer remember, though it was probably Mom, but it just so sums up Millie's spirit, making the best of a predicament with humor and goodwill. My brother Tim sent the following that he hoped I could read. I'm sorry I cannot be with you and with so many others who treasured Millie for the remembrance in Ossining April 30th. I recently lost a dear friend of MS, and his memorial is at the same time. To celebrate Millie's life is a sadness and a joy and a redundancy. She lived life as a celebration. There are, of course, so many memories that spring to mind of growing up years and visiting later, but I wanted to share just two with you. One is of her studio, especially after the expansion. It was a unique place in the universe, in part because it had the whole universe in it. During the 2 years I was part of Millie's Saturday art classes, I would stay later to help clean up and had the run of the place to absorb the environment of constant creative experimentation. Just as each of us students had the task of taking steps into the unknown in so many mediums, the etching and oil paints and stand out for me, but there were so many others. So Millie herself constantly stretched the reach of her challenges. I remember how during those years she embarked on large-scale pencil drawings. A gigantic portrait of Sharon in pastel colors, if I remember right, greeted you as you passed through the glassed-in walkway at the studio.
It's that one.
Oh, okay. The other memory is of how Millie and Jack responded to the catastrophic floods of Florence, which took place in November 1966. The water of the Arno rose so fast that curators and other personnel had to race to the Uffizi and other museums in the middle of the night to rescue as many treasures of art as possible. Peter and I were in Florence the next summer and could see the high water marks in mud far up the walls of the alleys and next to the Uffizi. Millie and Jack organized all their artist friends to join with them in a benefit exhibition and sale of their artwork, all the proceeds of which went to the Reconstruction Fund for Florence. They took the restoration of Florence as a personal responsibility to preserve and transmit something which enriched all humanity and could not be allowed to be lost to future generations. So are such exceptional lives lived. We are blessed by their inspiration. And final remark from my sister Lucy. She said, Millie's constant curiosity and exploration of new mediums and topics was lifelong. She produced much of great beauty and peace, but she was much more than just an artist. She was a humanist and loved people, and through art was giving expression to all the conditions and impressions that flowed into her from the world around her. She loved to love. She loved her family, all children, curiosity, experimentation, and visual expression. Her generosity and creativity as a teacher was emblematic. We were beyond fortunate that several of Mom and Dad's best friends were artists as well as intellectuals, Millie and Jack leading the pack. We were surrounded by them as teachers and adults who were engaged and passionate about life, art, and being socially caring human beings. I never take our education by exposure and osmosis to art and ideas for granted. I probably learned more growing up in the rich cultural environment fostered amongst Mom, Dad, and their friends and our relatives than I did in school. I appreciate the world around me through eyes that have been challenged to find the poetry and humanity in life. The world is a better place because of all the lives that Millie touched and the art she created. And I can just say that the world has probably never seen her like before and probably will not again, and we're all the poorer for it, yet we're all the richer for having been in her life. And I'm just grateful to be able to attend here and celebrate her life.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak?
I'd like to have Justin children getting there.
Go ahead, Sherry. Sherry wants to.
Let's go.
Sherry.
I met Millie years ago when David and Jill would come to Briarcliff twice a year. David would go off to a professional meeting with the shrinks, and I would take the Metro North here to have a play date with Jill, my close friend and my college roommate for over 45 years. Like many of you, I'd like to pay tribute to Millie as a teacher who gave our profession the respect it deserves. Although I was coming up to see Jill, Millie and I had our own relationship as educators. When I would arrive at the house before going on long walks with Jill, it was my Millie time. We were sort of colleagues, and she was extremely interested in what I was doing, teaching a very different student population. Several years ago, Millie was in the car when David and Jill were dropping me off to catch my train back to Manhattan. It was the same car ride I had taken each year for 20 years, twice a year for 20 years. But this time, Millie was present, and the art teacher was in the car, and she directed my eyes to what she thought I should see of the fall foliage. Honestly, I am no tree hugger, and I confess that I hated the Girl Scouts. But sitting next to Millie for just 10 minutes to Metro North, I forgot about my bad fall ragwood allergies, and I saw the autumn in a new way. In honor of you, Millie, I am wearing my orange Dayglow top. Millie, thank you for being a teacher we all should have had over and over again in our lives. I suspect you never had a LinkedIn profile, but had you, I can imagine the thousands of many endorsements and recommendations you would have received.
I'm Charlie Units, and as I said before, our families were close from the mid-50s when Millie and Jack moved to town. And I just want to say thank you to Millie very simply for a few things. First of all, for being just a good family friend, a good friend, and both thanks to her and Jack for being a good friend to my parents and my family. When I was a young man, just out of college, I, as I said before, got to know Millie and Jack more on my own. And I would go and hang out with them and just sort of talk and sort of dwell in their presence. And around that time, I had a dream. And in that dream, as you probably all know, if you knew Millie, she sort of thought of herself as a wizard of some sort, an enchantress or something like that. I think she even used the word witch at some point.
Oh, yeah.
But in this dream, I was sitting in the Adler's house, and I think Millie was maybe even wearing a wizard's hat or something like that. And she said, "Charlie, watch this." And she waved her hand or her wand, and the world of the house gradually began to spin, and it spun and it spun and it spun until I was completely kind of dizzy in what was going on. And I sort of woke from this, and I realized I was still dizzy with this sense of awareness that came from this dream and that derived from my contact with Millie and with Jack. And it was really a lesson about self and awareness. And it was somehow that the world was an important and significant place, but it was a significant place because of this dialogue between it and oneself and the sense of the meaning that one made out of the velocity of the world. And so I just want to thank Millie for that lesson, that sense. She gave me the book Centering by M.C. Richards at the time. I had
You have to ask how many people
How many people got that book? And the creative process. And actually, I'm not a potter, but I did do pottery for quite a few years, and it became important to me to do. But the message of both spinning and centering were very significant during that time and afterwards. I always have thought of Millie as the prophet of the religion of exuberance, and I thank her for kind of anointing me in that church, temple, synagogue community, and feel that I've had an amplified life from that. And also I thank Millie for the wonderful family that she has had, and I thank all 4 generations of Adlers that Deidre and I have become close with and feel deeply connected to, and thank her and Jack and all of you for the wonderful gifts you've all given us. Thank you.
Anybody else? We're winding down. Okay.
I have one story in closing because we all have to leave laughing. So Millie had a great sense of humor, and I could tell you many funny stories, but I'll tell you my favorite one. And that was that when Millie would meet a stranger, especially at an opening of her exhibitions, she'd always wear some of her statement jewelry. Well, mine is a little statement, but people would come up to Millie and they would look at her, and they'd say, "That's beautiful, where is that from?" And she would say, "Which one? This one or this
Thank you for validating the story. I told Karen, she was like, really?
Not just once. Many beaches, many museums.
We used to call it Aunt Millie jewelry.
Well, thank you all, and enjoy. There's more food out there that probably Millie can eat.
If you have any questions, ask them.